Ahmedabad University and to the conversation series. And we are a research university and we believe in discussions like these. And that is where we invite deep thinkers and scholars from all over the world and all over the areas to discuss about their research, their finding, their views, and not only to discuss with our student and faculty member, but we also invite people from outside so that they can benefit from this. It is my privilege to introduce today's speaker. We all know Jaithirth Rao, famously known as Jerry Rao, is an Indian businessman and entrepreneur. He's the founder and former CEO of the software company Mphasis. He's the founder of Value and Budget Housing Corporation, now known as VBHC, Value Homes Private Limited, an affordable housing venture which he founded in 2008. He was also a founder and director of Home First Finance Company, a housing finance company focused on providing housing finance to first-time home buyers. Rao is a recipient of several distinguished business and government recognitions. He has been the chairman of NASCAM. He was named Earnest and Young Entrepreneur of the year 2004 for the New York region. And in 2005, the Government of India, State of Karnataka honored him with the Rajyotsav Award. Apart from that, he's a deep scholar. He's a very passionate scholar. And one gets to know about his range and his writing and reflection when you look at the reference section of the book. And he's a very perceptive scholar in that sense. So we are honored to have Jaithirth Rao at Ahmedabad University, and we welcome you.
Right.
Now, the person who will be in conversation with Jerry Rao is Professor Sarthak Bagchi. Sarthak Bagchi is an assistant professor at the School of Arts and Sciences, Ahmedabad University. He also writes on politics for general audience in The Wire, The Indian Express, and the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, and appears as a political commentator for television news channels, NDTV, etc. Sarthak has also worked as a journalist with TV news channels, NewsX, before entering academics. He has previously worked with the KITLV, Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asia and Caribbean Studies. He was also a doctoral and postdoctoral scholar at Leiden and Göttingen University, Germany. And for his doctoral dissertation, Sarthak has conducted a comparative study of clientelistic politics in the assembly elections of Bihar and Maharashtra. Before I hand it over to Sarthak, there are certain rules. Throughout the conversation, everybody will be muted except our both the speakers. And we request you to put your questions in the everyone chat box. We'll take all these questions curated. And at the end of the conversation, somewhere around 5:10, we'll take all the questions and we'll request our speakers to address it. So thank you so much for joining. And I request Sarthak to take it forward from here.
Right. Thank you so much for this introduction, Sudeep. So, I mean, you have already elaborated a lot about Jerry, and we have had this conversation with Jerry for some time now, and it's my pleasure to have this conversation with you, Jerry. Before we begin onto the larger issues which you have explored very accurately in this book, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your own education or the motivation to how did you think about looking at these aspects of academics, and what motivated you into this kind of a research? So whether was it your education background, was it your the insights from your business? What was the motivation behind these academic pursuit?
A very interesting question. I had, when I was at U Chicago way back in the 1970s, I had spent some time with Gene Fama, where we had discussed, I had a couple of sessions with him discussing the agency problem, the managerial agency problem, which, as you know, is central in economics. And then I had forgotten about it. Some 10, 12 years ago, 2008 crisis ke baad, about 2009 mein, or maybe around that time, or maybe after the Satyam crisis, something after one of those crises, the Enron or whatever, Ira Pandey from the India International Center, Delhi, got in touch with me. And she said, we are doing a quarterly we do publish a quarterly magazine called IIC Quarterly. This one, we are doing it in October around Gandhi Jayanti. And many people are writing, do you want to write about Gandhian thought and business ethics and things like that? So I said, let me take a look at it. And I did a shortish article, which I think was reasonably well received. So that got me interested in Gandhi. And then my friendship with Shishir Jha in IIT Bombay, he is a political scientist. So he basically said that, instead of all your life you've been doing finance and IT and so on, why don't you look at political economy? And maybe this is a good lens to look at it. So that's how it started. It took me 10, 11 years to complete my research. I went all over the place. In between, before I started my research, I had already visited Durban and Pietermaritzburg. But in between, I visited Ahmedabad many times. I did a lot of backing and forthing, went to Boston, spent some time there. Slowly, the idea came to me that I'm now embarking on something bigger. This is not simply applying some Gandhian ideas or principles to some situations. That's interesting, but it's not. What really, and this is for a person like me, I have never been a great admirer of Gandhi. I am a great admirer of the British Raj. And to the extent Gandhi was such a great opponent of the British Raj, I have never been a great fan of his. But I basically got convinced that here we were dealing with a person who was a first-rate intellectual. In fact, my book should be called not Economist Gandhi, but Intellectual Gandhi. Because what I'm really arguing is Gandhi is a first-rate intellectual, and he is an intellectual in the highest category of intellectuals. I'm putting him with Burke and Adam Smith and people of that level. I'm also arguing that he's original. And I'm also arguing that he's universal. See, we have got lots of great people in India, Nehru, Patel, Rajagopalachari, Ambedkar. I'm not saying any of them were not great, but their intellectual contributions are relevant for India. Whereas Gandhi, as an intellectual, as a philosopher, as a political economist, as an educational theorist, as an aesthetician, I noticed has universal significance. Now, in the political sphere, that has already been conceded. Yeah. Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Lech Walesa, all these guys have photos of Gandhi in their office, and they all accept that Gandhi was their guru, etc., etc. Arab Spring movement, there are a zillion people who claim Gandhian affinity. Yeah. But in the areas of economics and political economy broadly and philosophy broadly, I don't see Gandhi getting the kind of importance that I believe he deserves. And I'm hoping that my book will be the first of a series of books that many will write, which will restore the importance, because Gandhi is one of India's contributions to the universal domain of knowledge. He's not just for us.
So, I mean, Gandhi usually, often we have seen that he's seen largely as a saint, or as somebody, like you said, about, from his idea of ahimsa and the political Gandhi. That's what we largely talk about. But it's interesting that you have zeroed in on the Economist Gandhi. I mean, of course, the intellectual Gandhi, but the title of your book is the Economist Gandhi. And you have also written in 2018 in the Economic and Political Weekly on Gandhi's ideas of trusteeship. I believe you take the idea of trusteeship to establish Gandhi's economic thoughts. And so I was just wondering that what made you interested in exploring this aspect of Gandhi through the trusteeship idea?
See, this is a very central problem in economics going back to Smith. It is called the agency problem. The agency problem quite simply is that I am the owner and you are the manager, and I ask you to manage my assets, and you have an incentive to steal from me. You have an incentive to be lazy and not to give me the proper return on my assets. This is the crux of the agency problem. How does equilibrium come? When there are misaligned incentives of this kind. And as I told you, I had discussed this with Gene Farmal many years ago. I'm sure he's forgotten about it. I don't think he even remembers me. So this came back to me that this trusteeship is not only an ethical doctrine, it might also be a very intelligent way to solve this problem. It might be the way, as you know, some of these knotty problems in economics never get fully solved, but at least partially solved, or at least better understood, better resolved, better put into context. So that's the reason I started exploring trusteeship. And when I started exploring trusteeship, very, very interesting things I stumbled upon. The first question I said, why did Gandhi suddenly say to all his rich friends, hey, you should be trustees of your wealth? Why did he wake up one morning and make such a speech? Where did he get this idea from? And that really took me on a very interesting journey, because Gandhi, again, as I said, he's got a universal message as an intellectual to the world. He's also got part of multiple traditions. So when you look at Hegel, you say, what did Hegel get from Kant? We look at people within intellectual traditions, right? When you look at Scruton, you say, what does Scruton get from Burke? So similarly, I try to situate Gandhi as an intellectual. What are the sources? What are the well springs from which the Mahatma draws his intellectual sustenance? And I came across several. The first, which I found very interesting, was the English legal tradition. We always keep forgetting that he was a barrister. And he went to England to study law. And one of his favorite books was Snell's Equity. Snell's Equity is very important because equity is unique to English common law. Equity doesn't exist in continental law and Code Napoleon and so on. It is an English common law concept, and Gandhi loved Snell's Equity. And he always used to make comparisons between Snell's Equity and the Bhagavad Gita. Now, what is this concept of equity? The concept of equity in English justice goes back 700-800 years. And the idea is that sometimes implementing the letter of the law does not achieve justice. Then the sovereign is required to find a way that justice is administered beyond the letter of the law. So the English sovereigns set up what are called courts of Chancery, where equity cases would be resolved. Now, of course, they've been merged in the 20th century, but for several hundred years, they had this. And equity is a very important idea because it also comes up with rights of minors. When somebody dies and his heirs are minors, who is going to take care of it? Will somebody steal? Will the minors be deprived of their rights? So equity becomes wards of state. All of that is part of the equity discussion. And Gandhi was attracted to it. By the way, so was Ambedkar.
Yeah.
Indian constitution is the only constitution which has a particular article which allows the judiciary to issue a writ of mandamus to achieve equity when the court's own judgment, adhering to the letter of the law and stare decisis, may in fact not achieve the final ends of justice. So if you've given the for building of a temple, the site, you don't stop there, you actually give the other aggrieved party extra land somewhere else. That's an actual intervention for equity. So there is this English legal tradition. Second is, there is a long Baniya tradition in Gujarat and Rajasthan, particularly, of the Baniyas, the merchants, viewing themselves as trustees. And Gandhi was acutely aware of this. Gandhi mentions the existence of Anandji Kalyanji Peedhi in
By
Ahmedabad.
trustee here, you also mean custodians, right?
Steward, the Quakers call it stewardship. Okay. So it comes together. The trust is a word that comes from English common law. The idea that you are managing a temple on behalf of the deity in the temple. The Anandji Kalyanji Trust doesn't own the land of the temple. That belongs to Adinath or Neminath or Parshvanath. These people only manage it. So they are Shabbaites, they are called in Indian jurisprudence by the British Indian courts. They came up with the word Shabbaite. The third source of Gandhi's inspiration, which we all know, is the Gospels of Mark and Matthew particularly. He knew both the Gospels by heart. And the Christian ethics was very central. He has made a reference in his Allahabad University speech. He says Christ was the greatest economist of his time. So he was a great admirer of Christian ethics and Christian principles. The fourth was the Isha Vasya Upanishad. Gandhi did not know Sanskrit. He learned a little bit of Sanskrit, I think, when he was in Yaravda jail, but he didn't know that much Sanskrit. So his acquaintance with the Gita and the Upanishads came from English translations. Isha Vasya Upanishad, he had read it through the Theosophical Society translations. He believed, and he has said this on more than one occasion, that if all Hindu scriptures were destroyed, but only the first verse of the Isha Vasya Upanishad was preserved, Hinduism would survive. He has said that. So Isha Vasya is a very interesting Upanishad. It's a poetic Upanishad. It's a smallish one. And it's attached to the Yajurveda. And it is one of the Maha Upanishads, Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, all the great Vagyakaras, they have written commentaries on. So it is one of the Maha Upanishads that Adi Shankara himself has. So it's very central. So again, people like Niraj Chaudhary always used to dismiss Gandhi. He was a Bhagat, he was not a scholar, he was a popular Hindu fellow, he knew nothing about classical high Hinduism. Not true. Gandhi was very acquainted with one of the classic central texts of Vedanta. And then the Bhagavad Gita was very important for Gandhi. And being Gandhi always has an ability to puzzle, do something quixotic that you never expect. In fact, anytime you read Gandhi, you start with the assumption that you will find something unexpected. That is the way he operates. Everybody talks of Bhagavad Gita as a text for war and all. Gandhi, as you know, is a believer in non-violence. So anyway, I am not interested in the political aspects of how Gandhi does all kinds of legislative domain to make the Bhagavad Gita a pacific text. That is, political scientists can look at that. I'm interested in the economic side. And there, what is interesting is he combines Snell's equity, he combines Isha Vasya Upanishad and the Gita to say, what is it? Why are we trustees? You're a wealthy man, Mr. Bagchi. But no, you're a trustee. Why? The answer is simple. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagata. The whole universe is pervaded by the spirit of the Lord. Everything that moves in the universe. So if the universe belongs to the Lord, the idea that you can own one house or one piece of land, one part of the universe, is absurd. You are there managing it as a trustee for the Lord. And the same thing in the Gita, you are the instrument who is using the asset. There is no doubt about it. You're in charge. You're in charge of the chariot. You're in charge of the instrument. But it is instrumental. It is not yours. And the fruits thereof, whether you get them or not, is less relevant than that you should act. So he was able to put all this together. So he took a simple English legal concept of trusteeship and he has expanded it into a magnificent philosophical concept, which I believe economists and business school professors around the world can and should read up on and should teach to their students, because I think there is enormous insight. This is the roots where he got his stuff from. Now, how do we compare him with others? I have done 2-3 comparisons. One I have done with Adam Smith, where I have said, and I have not gone with Smith's Wealth of Nations. I have focused on Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he published 10 years before Wealth of Nations, and talked about the impartial spectator that Smith talks about being equal to Gandhi's still small inner voice of conscience, and drawn the parallels. It's interesting. Both of them, by the way, were opposed to British rule and East India Company, both Smith and Gandhi. So a lot of parallels I have been able to see. And I've looked at some, yeah.
Can I come to that question? Because I have a question specific to that domain. But what I wanted to explore a little bit while we were at the topic of the trusteeship was this fascinating account of the Kalyanji Anandji Trust. And I read it in your book and it was like just fascinating. I wanted you to give a little bit of detail about that example that you have so fascinatingly curated in this book to our audience, and also the importance of Ahmedabad, because I think you have dealt with that very intensely.
Did you invite Samved Bhai to join this thing? I don't see his name there. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'll tell you what it is.
So I just wanted to, you to reflect a little bit about the choice of Ahmedabad and how did Ahmedabad's socio-economic composition influence Gandhi's ideas?
Let me start with the second question and then come to the Kalyanji. Kalyanji. See, Gandhi comes back from South Africa, right? He's in Bombay. Bombay is where the Indian National Congress was formed. It's where the money is. It's where the action is. And then Gokhale tells him, go and see the country. So he goes and sees the country. Then he has to make a choice where to settle down. Now, he could have chosen Bombay. Lots of people in Bombay would have given him money. Juhu May would have got land. He could have started his stuff. He could have chosen Surat. That is where the East India Company started. So it would have been a very ironically good thing for the opponent of British rule to go there. He could have gone back to his Saurashtra, where he came from. But he didn't. I think he rejected Saurashtra primarily because he didn't want to get into this chakkar of these native states Maharajas. So if he did political action in Rajkot, it would be directed against the Maharaja and that becomes a problem, etc. So it is better to be in British India. And I think he chose Ahmedabad because it suited him better than Bombay. Of course, some people have argued that there were too many great leaders in Bombay, like Ferozshah Mehta and so on. And so Jinnah included, and Gandhi didn't want all that competition. So he went to Ahmedabad. That's a one kind of political mischievous way of looking at it. And there might even be a small element of truth in that. I'm not, after all, he was a politician. But he also, I think, saw that there was a healthy business environment in Ahmedabad. And he specifically has written about it. He said Ahmedabad is a city that can become an example for the whole world if it can have businessmen who support. For Gandhi, sanitation was very important, a clean city, and support a vibrant city and so on. So he was quite clear about that. And he mentioned specifically, let's come to this, Anandji Kalyanji Trust. Anandji Kalyanji Trust, if you talk to the Lalbais, they will tell you it's about 400 years old. However, they really have records only for about 300 years and strong records for 200 years. So what is it? It is a complex set of rules and an institution, PD, it's called in Gujarati. PD can be firm, organization, company. And it is supposed to look after these, what are they? There's a Jain sect they are. They're not Digambars. They're Shwetambar Jain temples in Rajasthan, Gujarat, including your Ronakpur and all these temples. And it is run by these trustees as a group. Traditionally, the Nagar Sheth family of Ahmedabad, the Lalbais, their ancestors were Shantidas Javeri, they have been leading trustee, members of the trustee council, sometimes the leading trust chairman, usually, traditionally. Kasturbai Lalbai was for many years. Now Sabel Lalbai is there, etc. But I think what Gandhi understood was that there is a tradition, there is a big tradition in Western India of rich merchants digging step wells, of maintaining temples, of doing stuff which are intergenerational in terms of management of assets, so that it's not as if you only do it for your lifetime, but it's multi-generational trusteeship is done. Vijendra Tripathi has done a lot of research on this whole Nagar Sheth and this tradition in Ahmedabad. And Gandhi was attracted to it. And sure enough, he was very close to Ambalal Sarabhai and Kasturbai Lalbai, both the Nagar Sheth types of Ahmedabad when he got there. And they both supported him, both financially and morally. So he was right in making that choice. And I think this Gujarati Baniya connection or Vaishnav Baniya Jain connection is not to be underestimated. It's a very old, and the point I make in my EPW article is that every time we say, oh, trusteeship started from British law, maybe, but well before the British came to India, Anandji Kalyanji PD was there. They just changed their name from PD to trust when the new rulers came. That's all. They didn't. And by the way, when there was a Mughal ruler, they got a farman from him also. So they are kind of almost agnostic towards rulers, but they are faithful to Adinath. They are faithful to the deity in the temple. So this idea, and if you look at in Gujarati, you can read the rules and all that of Anandji Kalyanji, PD. Fiduciary duty, how you cannot commingle funds of one purpose for another, which is very important in trusteeship and in modern financial management, mutual funds and so on. We're always looking, you cannot commingle. So the money used for maintaining the Ranakpur temple cannot be used for maintaining the Dharamshala. Each has to be done separately. There is all these rules and succession planning. Succession planning is very important. And I think it was a big obsession with Kasturba Lalbai. He made some changes to the trust deeds because he was very worried that one of his descendants may not be a worthy person to be the trustee. So he didn't want to make it purely hereditary. So various things like that appealed to Gandhi. So I think your people on this call, those of them who are in Ahmedabad, please do, catch up on reading some of these things and see the work that Anandji Kalyanji Nupidi is still doing. They are still maintaining those temples. It's now 400 years since Adinath and Nebinath and Parshvanath gave them the obligation and the sacred duty to do so. They're still doing it.
Right. And I think you also mentioned that I think Bombay at that time was a little too cosmopolitan or a little too heterogeneous.
I think Gandhi wanted to be rooted in India.
Yeah.
And that he did not want to get sucked, because if you look at Hind Swaraj, the whole basis of Hind Swaraj is let us not become imitation Englishmen.
Yes.
And there was a danger that all his followers in Bombay would be imitation Englishmen. Unlikely in Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad, they still wore dhotis and they still, they were rooted in the old Ahmedabad where you have all those Srinathji Mandir and all that. They're all rooted in Orthodox, Rani Rupmati Mosque. They're all rooted in the soil. And I think that's another reason why I prefer Ahmedabad.
Right. Thank you. Now, actually coming back to the question that you were talking about Adam Smith. So I wanted to ask that who were key European cultural history? I mean, who were the players or who were the key figures of European cultural history that influenced Gandhi's intellectual formation? And if you can elaborate on the key ideas, because you were also, I think, what was very important that you were mentioning, how he brought an amalgamation of Western and Indian philosophical thoughts. And I think this will help the audience locate the economist and the intellectual Gandhi and his ideas towards.
See, there's two things to look at. Every one of us, you, I, we don't stand independent. We are part of a chain. So you can choose to be part of a Marxist chain. I can choose to be part of a Burkean chain. That's a different matter. But we are in a chain. To think that we have suddenly originally come up with ideas which are not part of a strand in tradition, in human traditions, is silly. So Gandhi's train is what I talked about, that 4 or 5 places from where he derives his inspiration. I don't think he derived inspiration from Adam Smith. No. He derived inspiration from English law. He derived inspiration from the Gospels, from Gita, from Isha Vasya Upanishad, and from Gujarati Baniya traditions. He always mentions that, Tolstoy and Ruskin and those, but, those were kind of intellectual fashions rather than traditions. Okay. But with Smith, my point is not so much that Smith influenced Gandhi or Gandhi influenced Smith. I mean, Smith did not influence Gandhi much. And certainly Gandhi couldn't have, because Smith lived 200 years before Gandhi. But there are parallels between the two of them. That's the point I'm trying to make. I am trying to say that, look, everybody, all your students in your university know one line of Smith. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, that one line from Wealth of Nations. Everybody is selfish, and in pursuing their selfishness, they give bread and meat to all of us. That is one line in one book. It is not all of Smith. Smith was a great moral philosopher, and he wrote Theory of Moral Sentiments 10 years before he wrote Wealth of Nations. Similarly, in Gandhi, look at the questions that Pandey raised in the beginning. Oh, did Gandhi like machines and so on? The general view is Gandhi is some kind of a backward Luddite, langot pen, vegetarian, some kind of reactionary, non-modern, and therefore not a weighty intellectual. The real weighty intellectuals of India are, Jawaharlal Nehru, who wrote Discovery of India, and Rajagopalachari, who wrote Chakravarti Thirumagan, and Ambedkar, who wrote the Constitution. Gandhi is bogus. That's not true. So both Smith needs to be revisited. We need to go to Smith as a theory of moral sentiments, and Gandhi needs to be revisited as an intellectual. And we have to see what are the commonalities between the two, where do they differ, and I found surprising synchronicity in their ideas. That was the point. There's a whole chapter called Adam Smith and the Mahatma in my book, where this is all I do. I'm just taking, and I'm acknowledging, you see, most of these Marxist fellows who dominate all American universities today, they will tell you, I have everything, Gandhi was a Marxist and all. No. I just reject all those kinds of childish ways of looking at it. Gandhi is a very complex person. And there is a lot in common between Gandhi and the Scottish Enlightenment, even though Gandhi is religious, Scottish Enlightenment by and large is agnostic. Even though there are, Scottish Enlightenment by and large upholds Western civilization, and Gandhi was pretty much opposed to Western civilization. So not that there are no differences, but there are synchronicities, there are areas where they come together. And I think we would benefit, you and I and all of us would benefit if we study them side by side. I think that is the value for your students, is if they can see these parallels and study them side by side. First of all, please make sure all your students don't read only Wealth of Nations and don't read only one sentence in Wealth of Nations. They must read Theory of Moral Sentiments. Similarly, in Gandhi, they have to read the totality of Gandhi and see. Gandhi's Allahabad University Muir College speech is something that they should all read. It's not a very long speech. It is worth reading because it tells you what are Gandhi's views on economics. And it lays them down in such crystal. And he, by the way, he has quoted Wallace, he has quoted Shakespeare, he has quoted the Gospels, he has quoted the Upanishads, everything in that speech. So the man is not some aragara, he's a very high-level intellectual.
Right. In fact, I think Sunil Khilnani, in one of his accounts about Gandhi, talks that the way he dresses, or the way he dressed himself after he came to India, public figure, there was a lot of brainstorming which even went into, deciding that what should be his headgear, or the Gandhi topi eventually was invented. And also, how should he be, what kind of clothes should he be wearing? So there was a lot of, brainstorming, or it was a very carefully cultivated.
Nothing he did was without very careful planning.
Yes, in fact,
even his choice of words.
Yes,
his choice of words. He goes to the Quakers. By the way, he was very close to the Quakers. They influenced him, and he influenced them. The Quakers, they call themselves Society of Friends. So he goes. The first place he makes a public speech in London when he goes to the Round Table Conference is at the Friends' house, at the Quaker house. What is he trying to tell the British upper classes? I have friends among you. We are friends. I'm going to the friend's house. That's where I'm speaking. I mean, look, and if you read that speech also, it's a very brilliant speech. Even the punned words, each of them has a meaning. Similarly, his speech to the Round Table Conference, outstanding speech. His speech to the mill owners in Lancashire.
Yeah.
In every one of them, he plans what he wants. You read the difference between the speech to the Allahabad University Economic Society in 1916, right?
Mhm.
And go 15 years later to Kashi Vidyapith speech in Hindi on the Bhagavad Gita. You can see from English to Hindi, Muir College to Kashi Vidyapith, from very British English upscale English speaking college to this. Then subject, instead of focusing on Gospel of Mark and Matthew, now he's talking on Gita. The man is just extraordinary when you see the entire intellectual journey that he was able to make.
Yeah, right. I think, I mean, it was not only the expanse, but also the depth and his ability to also self-correct his course. I think that's also what Ramchandra Guha emphasizes on about Gandhi's greatness, or, I mean, idea of why he is so, why he's so popular, or why he should be carefully studied, is because he was able to self-correct or invigorate. I mean, in the sense that he would be able to self-criticize himself. I mean, that was something which is
also, I think more important than that, the most important thing was his ability to combine idealism with practical empiricism. See, he says somewhere, I don't want Mussolini to succeed in India because I don't want us to lose our freedom. Then in next sentence he says, but if you socialists keep making trouble, let me tell you, these rich people, they will support Mussolini. So one, he takes the idealistic position, then he gives them practical. For God's sake, don't create lawlessness or attack on property rights, which will make, like the rich in Italy finally did go with Mussolini. You don't want the Indian rich to go. So these are very, very interesting ideas that he, and then he tells the rich people, you will also always have to have guards to look after your wealth, because they are going to come for it. The masses are going to come for it. Unless you can establish a compact, you can establish a social contract which doesn't create the violence from that side. So, he's got this practicality, but he says you should do it because the universe belongs to God and you are a trustee.
Right.
And then practically, don't give too much money to your children. If you give them too much money, they will acquire bad habits, they will become lazy. Right. So that's a practical thing. So, he's able to do this all the time.
Yeah. No, this brings me to a very interesting topic in your book, which I noted was about like Gandhi's goal of removing grinding poverty, right? Or his ideas about pauperism that you also reflect on. And I was just wondering that, we have, and I have read your recent piece in the print also about inequality. But I was just still wondering that, in this age of rising inequality, or where poverty is still persisting, how would Gandhian economic thought configure or grapple with this problem, wherein, the rich keep getting richer?
The first thing is, he was not a poverty lover.
Yeah.
The first thing we must demolish is that he loved poverty. He never did. That is not true. He has gone on record that there is nothing that is more dehumanizing than grinding pauperism. We must eliminate grinding pauperism. Usme to there is absolutely no doubt. So anybody who says Gandhi was a poverty lover has not read his Gandhi. 2, he was not in favor of, or he would not have been in favor of today's welfarism, because he repeatedly says, please give jobs to able-bodied people, don't give them doles. And when some Americans come and say, what can we give you? He says, please don't give me money. Please send your engineers to India to help us improve our engineering. So he is in human capital. He is not interested in charity. He is against welfarism and charity. The third thing he is very clear is that different people will get different rewards based on their talents and efforts. This idea that everybody will get the same reward is absolutely unacceptable to him. Fourth thing is, he doesn't want the state to control, he wants people to control. Having said all this, these are all general principles. His most important general principle is that stop focusing on rights, let's all focus on duties. And he is saying to the rich, you have a duty to act as a trustee. He's saying to the poor, you have a duty to improve yourself. He is saying to the children of the rich, you have a duty not to take your parents' money, but to make it on your own. So he is talking about the duties. And I think that is where, particularly today, post-2008, in the crisis of modern market capitalism that we have, the crisis is a moral crisis. And we are trying to solve it through technocratic means. Start one more institution, one more law, Frank Dodd law, some more MPLA law. That is what the world is responding. I don't think it's going to work. We have to go back and read our Smith. If he is the father of modern market capitalism, let's get the right inspiration and let's revisit the Mahatma, the strange and puzzling intellectual of our country and our age, and see what insights they are able to give us to deal with these moral quandaries. Now, to come back to your question, I don't think Gandhi would have cared about inequality. That didn't bother him. But grinding pauperism, that bothered him no end. And to the extent we have that in our country as well as in other parts of the world, that is an indictment of all of humanity. It is certainly an indictment when people are selling their children and things like that. That means that is grinding pauperism. What can be more grinding than that? That means you've got a, luckily, I mean, food situation is a little better in India than 50, 60 years ago. So there's no cannibalism and things like that. But we still have extreme poverty. And that I think Gandhi would have been very disappointed that 75 years after we got freedom, we still have large parts of our country where poverty is extreme.
Right. No, in fact, that's one of the revelations from the book that I got. But also, I think one more important aspect which I particularly found interesting was, because I think this book or your views not only try to establish Gandhi as an economist or as an intellectual, but also tries to debilitate some of the myths, like you mentioned, like you should not look at him as somebody who loved poverty, because there's a common perception that it took a lot.
Because he wore a langot.
Yeah, right. Or he was known as a fakir or something like that.
Nothing of that.
Yeah. There is another, if you read Hind Swaraj, there is another common perception that Gandhi was critical of machines. And I think, the question in the beginning was also kind of indicating that many people thought that he was, anti-machine. But my question is that, he felt that machines would lead to the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. And I wanted to understand that how would you, reflect on his idea of machines, or his antipathy towards these large-scale machines, or in the age of AI, machine learning and automation, where do we see the relevance of Gandhi's ideas of labor? Particularly, I wanted to, because you have also very, very beautifully described his idea of using machine, the charkha as a machine. And if you can combine those two things in this answer, I think that would be very helpful for our audience.
See, Hind Swaraj was written exactly at the turn of the 20th century, at a time when British rule extended through most of the world. They were the largest empire in human history. And it was to deal, it was primarily addressed to other Indians, by the way. It was not addressed to the British.
No.
It was addressed to other Indians as to what is your identity, what should you be doing, how should you grapple with your identity issues. And in that process, he is trying to say that reckless imitation of the West, which was the prescribed thing in those days, is not smart. It is also not particularly morally sound, because the West itself is not living up to its best traditions. It is not as if the West is following the New Testament, the Gospels. They are not. Number two, there was this view in India that it is these cannons, it is these steam trains. This is what makes, the West strong. And he wanted to dispel that, saying that strength comes from character, strength comes from social compacts, not only from physical machinery. Having said all this, there are many lines in Swaraj which clearly show that he's against machines. But I think we should take a holistic view of the man, not just what was said in 1900, but throughout his life, what did he do? He used the printing press himself.
Yeah.
That's a machine. He was very fond of the singer sewing machine.
Yeah.
He praised the inventor many times. That's a machine. He used telegraph.
Yeah.
He used telegraph. He took trains. He used the All India radio in his later years. He used microphones. He asked Maurice Friedman, hey, take this charka and improve it. So Friedman improved the charka and he created a new improved charka, which was more user-friendly and lighter and so on. And he was very much into eye-hand coordination and working with one's hands. He was very friendly with Maria Montessori, the educationist, who had understood that development of fine motor skills, eye-hand coordination, left brain, right brain integration is very important in early education. And they were good friends, Montessori and Gandhi. So I think he saw machines that way. And he was very concerned that there was this view among his countrymen, especially the elites in India, if we get the machine tomorrow, we'll be okay. All that India is missing is that we are missing some machines. It's like many countries in the last 30, 40 years. If we get tanks, if we get aeroplanes, if we get machine guns, we can. Doesn't work like that. Do you have in your country the capability of making tanks and aeroplanes and machine guns? If you're designing them, it's the human capital that makes a country strong, not just having guns. And that's the point that I think Gandhi was trying to make in Swaraj. So I'm not defending every single page of Swaraj. There are some pages where he is clearly against machines, but I am putting it in a context of trying to understand the man, and more importantly, trying to understand what is the message you and I want to take away. What is it that we want to take away? I mean, we can spend the rest of our time just criticizing the old man, but how does that help us? Let us try and learn from some of the gems he has said, not simply, this whole business of pulling down Gandhi's statue because he made one statement sometime in Africa which was not politically correct. I am totally against these kinds of ways of looking at it. Let us try. He was a very great man, very great intellectual. Let us learn from that and not spend our whole time trying to just pick holes. I don't know if you're with me there.
No, I mean, I completely agree. And I think, looking at historical figures, especially in today's context, brings its own problems. And I feel it should be extended not only to Gandhi, but to other historical figures also. I mean, we were just talking about Tipu Sultan, some people oppose him, but we have to understand that, how he bought in the rocket machinery and how he went on to, expand the global reach of his empire, of his maybe kingdom, sorry. So I think I mean, all historical figures are, should be seen in their totality and not just in selectively picking things.
Yeah.
But I agree with you on that. But what I wanted to understand, because you talked about this very interesting aspect of the human capital, and I think that is something which is also linked to this idea of education. And I think one of the very important and often less reflected or less analyzed, talked about idea of Gandhi's thoughts was on Nai Talim. And I wanted, I think, because you have
Yeah.
also mentioned that in the book, because the idea that there is an English is not only a language in India, but it is more of a skill, seen as a skill. And there's an over dependency. I mean, Satish Deshpande has this beautiful article called The Story of My English. And I think which we teach here at the university to our students. And I think Nai Talim brought in some kind of a, path-breaking thing about breaking away from those dependency on English. I wanted to get your reflections on were there any congruences between Nai Talim and the NEP, the National Education Program of 2020, which has recently come in, and how would you contextualize both of them?
Okay, see, Kumarappa was himself an economist, an accountant, and he was a close friend of the Mahatma. So the two of them got together, and then Marjorie Sykes and a few others, and put together this idea of Nai Talim in Wardha, in Sevagram. And this was in the 30s. This was after the Salt March. Okay, what were they trying to achieve? Gandhi was not very interested, frankly, in higher education. Malavya, Ani Besant, Syed Ahmed Khan, all these guys were building universities in India. Gandhi was very interested in school education, school level. And he said, listen, we are not doing a good job. Let us try and figure out a way. So Kumarappa opens it by saying the medium of instruction in Nai Talim will be spinning. So it's not a language at all. Neither Hindi nor Urdu nor English. It is spinning. He's going back to Montessori. He's saying, listen, children have to learn by touching, feeling objects. And he says, by the way, we will first teach drawing, then we will teach writing. So the language is going to come in standard 3, standard 4. It is not going to come in the first 2-3 years. You're still talking about drawing skills and spinning skills, eye-hand coordination, fine motor skill development. So the Gandhi gardening was going to be important. Carpentry was going to be important. So everything that was what I call the Scottish tradition of tinkering, James Watt sitting with the steam engine and tinkering, which we have neglected in Free India. In Free India, all we do is memorize texts and regurgitate them in examinations. We've become a total rote learning examination country. And you can't convince Indian parents otherwise today, because that is the key to success. But I think in the process, one, because I have argued in my book, everybody says India has not done well in manufacturing because electricity is not there, labor problems are there, this, that. I am saying there is a problem also in our educational system, which doesn't encourage manufacturing kind of stuff. The development of skills like having foundries, having castings, these kinds of things are important.
Right.
There is Victor Hansen talks about this. When Patton is asked, how come your soldiers are moving so fast across Europe? The English and the other people are not able to move so fast. He said, listen, every American kid is also a mechanic. This is the America of not today. Today, they're all, I don't know what they are. But in the 1940s, every American kid that came and joined the army also knew. So if the Sherman tank breaks down, in 20 minutes, half an hour, they know how to fix it and keep moving. So Gandhi was very particular that and Kumarappa was. Now, Nai Talim, got a lot of bad press. It got a lot of bad press primarily from the Muslim League. The Muslim League argued that this was a way to impose Hindi on the Muslims. And that's why they are doing this, which I think is unfair. It's not, there was no, how can you impose anything when you're teaching spinning? Give me a break. But it was a political position that they took. But tragically, after independence, Nai Talim has been completely ignored. NEP and Atal Tinkering Laboratories that was started some years ago, those two are the first times in recent history when some of the Nai Talim ideas are being brought back into the public domain for debate and discussion and implementation. It's very fascinating. Otherwise, from 1947 onwards, CBSE, ICSE, Bussa, everything was about exams, about, IIT entrance exam, this, that. It was all about, and it was all about knowledge not related to, in fact, G.D. Naidu was a great inventor. He went to the Coimbatore Engineering College and told them, you don't need a 5-year degree. We'll make it a 3-year degree, and for 2 years, we'll get them to work in foundries and factories, and I'll produce better engineers. Madras University said, no way. They fired him. G.D. Naidu was asked to leave because the whole approach was cram and write exams, not learn anything with your hands, not kind of. So I think Gandhi's education ideas has come back a little bit between Atal Tinkering Laboratory and now NEP a little bit, but they should have been more explicit in acknowledging Nai Talim. Right. That they have not done. No, they should also, because again, it's important because Gandhi is an intellectual contributor to the world. Yeah. He is with Montessori. Everybody recognizes that Montessori is an important pedagogical thinker. So is Gandhi. So is Kumarappa. That's the point we need to make. Yeah. This is not about, this is about understanding, oh my God, there's so much for us to learn from Gandhi.
Yeah. I think this is also why I think many universities like Ahmedabad University also lay an emphasis on, learning by doing and project-based learning. So, this is actually taking students out of the classroom. So classrooms are not the only sites of learning anymore. And I think that is something which is very important to be,
But you're doing it at the college level, and that is good. But I think we should increase it now at the school level.
Definitely, yeah.
Because I think if they come from a cramming and exam atmosphere for 10 years of school, and the fathers and mothers are telling them all you should do is to cram and write exams, you're not going to develop the holistic kind of thing that skills that are necessary. Particularly now that you mention AI and the new world. In the new world, who knows, maybe playing games. I have no idea what are the skills. But one thing is for sure, left brain, right brain integration, fine motor skills, eye-hand coordination, musicality, these things are never going to become unimportant. And gardening, one of the reasons gardening is very good is it gets you in touch with organic living things. It also gives you deferred gratification. You plant a seed today, it takes 18 days to come up. So the child is able to see. So these are things which will pay off. I am not saying we should not do book learning or we should not teach calculus. Of course we must. By the way, Kumarappa makes a great point. He says in teaching chemistry, you have to have good labs and people have to work with hydrogen sulfide. And he says similarly in teaching music, people have to actually practice music. It's not a theoretical thing that you... So I think Kumarappa has again been very, very underappreciated, particularly his educational thing has been underappreciated. You see, everybody, you can judge them by their weaknesses. Oh, us book mein Kumarappa, he has made some statements against the lower castes or some against some banyas or something. So, he's an anti-lower caste fellow. He's an upper caste hegemonist. Something poor Kumarappa has been put into a cage. He's actually was very upper caste. There is no doubt. He's a Protestant Christian from Tanjore, upper caste. But so what? I mean, the point. And again, if you take a look at the totality of his writings, it's so good. He should not have made some stupid statement. Similarly with music, he said, let us have folk music. The moment he said that, Muslim League and others said, no, this guy is trying to bring bhajans into our lives. He could have just said music. Nobody would have objected. These are things that he got trapped. That's why Naithalim got bad press before independence. But the tragedy is after independence, until the last 10 years, we haven't revisited it at all.
Right. Okay. I have to ask Sudhir if we have the time for a last question, or do we have audience questions now?
Yeah, we have, but if you have a last question, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
So we
I'll
can take
just
5
have
minutes.
this last question and then we'll go for the audience.
That would be wonderful.
So I wanted to close the discussion with this following remark by Rajmohan Gandhi in the foreword of your book. That he says, and I quote, that while its title might surprise those unaware of Gandhi's involvement with economics, the book also enlightens the reader with some of Gandhi's views on ethics, religion, human nature, and society. So can you please tell a little bit about Gandhi's views on human nature and society?
Yeah. First of all, we have to be very clear. Gandhi is a religious person. He's a Sanatani Hindu, as he calls himself. But he follows the clever traditions of Sanatani Hindus. What are the clever traditions? If you go back and look at every Bhashyakara in Vedanta, for instance, he will completely disagree with his predecessor, but he will praise him. Gandhi is like that. He is able to take that Apastamba Sutra, Yajurveda idea of Yuga Dharma nicely forward. What are ashrams in the old days associated with? They are in the forests, they are in Himalayas. Old people go there and do some prayer and puja. Gandhi inverts that. Ashram will be right next to the city of Ahmedabad, right in the heart of India in Sevagram. It will be involved in social work. So this is a typical Gandhi's way of dealing with stuff. And Anthony Parel makes a point. Gandhi really is a thinker in the Indian tradition of the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata and the Tirukkural of Tiruvalluvar. He is interested in the Purusharthas, Artha, Dharma and Kama. But he is able to recast them for contemporary times. And that is the greatness of the man. He is able to say, for instance, feminism. In Northern Indian languages, you people, when you refer to Purush, you normally mean male person, right? In Sanskrit, that is not. Purusha actually means the fortress of dawn, the fortress of early morning. And Gandhi says Purusha means human being. And therefore, he brings women into the equation. So he doesn't reject Purushartha. He doesn't reject the Sanatana Dharma term. He just does a very clever reinterpretation of it. And that is, by the way, legitimate intellectual behavior in India. Ramanuja can praise Shankara but completely disagree with him. That is acceptable. And Radhakrishnan can re-summarize both of them and come up with his own version of what constitutes Mayavada. That is also completely respectable. Gandhi uses that methodology to do what he does. So I think what Rajmohanji is trying to say is that in the process of looking at political economy, which is more than just economics, one ends up, whether one likes it or not, looking at religion, looking at philosophy, looking at the cross currents of these things. And in the case of Gandhi, because he lived such an intensely practical life, you look at both the stated ideals and the practical empiricism.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think the question of that political economy would have become more clearer if we touched upon the topic of identity economics. I think.
Yeah, maybe Sudhir, in your questions,
yeah, maybe in the questions
some
we will have
identity
that.
economics.
Yes, right.
Yeah, Darshan, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I am Darshan Desai. I am a journalist based in Ahmedabad. Well, first of all, it was a very, very fascinating conversation. You know, the more one listens about Gandhi, the more one realizes that, you can do it for for one's lifetime and still have questions left and still have left him unstudied. Well, my simple, straight question was, in today's scenario, where we can see that the economic policies or the political economy, policies are all being, would seem to be driven for certain classes of society. So there is an attack on the forest, there is an attack on the rural areas, there is an attack on farmers. So the marginalized communities are getting further marginalized. And if Gandhi's economics was to be implemented today, would it be possible, number one, and how? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, listen, we really have to go back to a broader societal consensus. If what happened really between 1980 and 2008 was that we accepted the kind of victory of capitalism and so on said, and that will simply continue and take us forever. Post 2008, we've had 30 years of serious self-questioning as to whether, as a global community, human beings, we are in fact understanding our economics well. And in that, I think Gandhian insights become very important. The environment. All over Gujarat, there are step wells. Now, these rich people who built these step wells, they didn't build it for their benefit. They built it in the interests of multi-generational trusteeship. The same thing is there in southern India. In every temple town, there will be a column, there will be a tank attached to the temple, which has been maintained, dug, etc., by some rich local zamindar, king, merchant, somebody. So we need to start thinking along these lines. Eleanor Armstrong, the Nobel laureate who did work on environmental economics, she has talked about some of these things, about how do we avoid the tragedy of the commons? How do we avoid, taking on more forest land? In fact, we should be doing the reverse. We should be returning more land to the forest. How do we do that? I mean, I think we are not talking. If you look at it, there is no conversation. There is some lecture giving in Copenhagen or Paris or something. And Edinburgh, there is some big global television event. Where is the conversation? Where is the intellectual conversation? Everybody is looking for a quick solution. Let us do carbon credits. Let us do this. Are we engaging with each other on the fundamental issues and looking at what our ancestors have done? What have they done? And what can we learn from them in order that going forward we can? And some of these solutions are not going to be easy, because the trade-offs are extremely excruciating. For instance, there is a movement, let us not have chemical fertilizers and pesticides. That Ceylon fellow tried to do it, and then he has had a disaster in his island. Production has plummeted, inflation has gone through the roof, human misery has increased. So it's excruciating, is my point. But if we don't talk and if we don't engage, we are not going to make progress. What has happened is we've got polarized situations. Everybody is doing propaganda. In fact, there is one fellow I met the other day. He's a very interesting fellow. He came to me and said, no, sir, we should use more fertilizers, more pesticides. We should do more intensive cultivation. I said, why? He said that in the same land, we'll be able to grow more. And then we can start returning land to the forests. So his idea of solving the forest problem is to increase the intensity of agricultural technology, which seems like a contradiction. But I'm not saying he's right or wrong. Are we having these conversations? I don't think we are. I don't think we are. What we are seeing is what you are seeing, Mr. Desai. Hare, everything is drifting. I mean, forest people are hurting, urban poor are hurting, everybody is hurting, total water availability is coming down, every major city is either getting water shortage or every 2 years massive floods. And we are seeing it, and we are not talking about it, we are not engaging with it. I think if we went back to Gandhi, we could, all of us collectively, make some progress. I'm not saying we'll solve all problems and solve them overnight, but I think we can make some progress and come towards some consensus.
Thank you. The next question is by Professor Himani Bakshi. If you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sudhir. Thanks a lot for this interesting discussion. So this is more like sharing my confusion, and I seek some kind of an input from you on this issue of decentralization. So when I'm looking at my area of fiscal decentralization and I want to check what Gandhi has talked about, I get stuck at his ideas of economic decentralization, where probably everyone whom I've read had been focusing on rural and planning part, but I don't know how Gandhi probably would have really discussed the idea of powers to the local bodies, powers not just in terms of planning, but also to be independent fiscally and then to be able to, because, the rural set of organizations and including PRIs can actually become independent on economic planning if they have fiscal power. Right now, that's tied up. So what do you think Gandhi's ideas are, and that too in the current scenario where too much of centralization is happening? I think it's the time we really, if can see Gandhian's ideology in these era.
You see, if you go back to our constitution, we took the Government of India Act of 1935, which actually had greater provincial autonomy, and we actually reduced it and made it a 1950 constitution is more centralized than the Government of India Act of 1935. Gandhi's approach, he would have opposed the centralization provisions of the 1950 constitution, definitely. There's no doubt about it. He would have opposed it. But I'll give you a clue to what kind of creative solutions he and Kumarappa would have come up with. Kumarappa openly says, I am going to start colleges. I don't want any support from the government. I don't want any centralization. We will start our own schools and colleges and we will run them. We don't need your money. And he says agricultural colleges, they will grow enough to make profits and run themselves. Same will happen with engineering colleges. We will make enough in our workshops to support the engineering colleges. So theirs is always a out of the box, unusual, unexpected solution is what Gandhi would have come up with. He was very keen that at least, not 100%, but at least a part of the school's costs come from the school's garden produce, carpentry workshops, etc. They should create some, not. And he was also very much for voluntary. How he would go and persuade rich people to voluntarily adopt a school, or Jamnalal Bajaj would adopt some things like that. That would have been his solution, something that frankly I can't even begin to imagine, because Gandhi will always do something that you and I will not imagine, cannot expect. But I'm giving you some clues, some hints, based on what you read in his writings and what Kumarappa says. They would have come up with some very imaginative ways to deal with this problem. But generally, the extremely strong Republic of India, which frankly, politically, I support. I'm not, I disagree with Gandhi, but I don't think he would have supported.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. We have time from 4 to 5:30, but I think we are going to exceed for 10 more minutes. So I request your time, Jerry, for that. Last couple of questions. So I would like to now invite Aproop to ask his questions. Aproop, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, my question is that this Mahatma Gandhi's economic thought are the best for his economic vision. What do you say about it? Means particularly emphasizing on the physical labor's part and the present pollution problems.
I don't understand your question fully.
Gandhian economic thoughts,
Yeah.
they make the vision of his environmental vision also.
Environmental vision, yeah. See, Gandhi was obsessed with cleanliness and sanitation.
Yeah.
He was obsessed with, human excrement, how to handle it, how to minimize unhygienic stuff. He was not in favor of multi-storied big buildings. He was, in fact, when he went to Chettinad, he told the Chettiars of Chettinad, I would build for you better, airier and sunnier and nicer buildings without all this, and which will also be aesthetically pleasing. Don't think it won't be artistically pleasing. That's the point he made with them. So his idea of town planning would have been completely different from Panditji's. Panditji loved Chandigarh and cement, concrete, and Gandhi would not have gone with that. Gandhi would not have gone. Gandhi would have been very much for an organic thing, but with heavy emphasis on sanitation, but voluntary sanitation efforts. I don't think he would have looked to establish huge sewage farms or huge sewage treatment plants and massive things. He would have gone for community-based, very difficult to pull off. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're asking what he would have, I'm trying to imagine what the old man would have said. These are the directions he would have gone.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Ramya Ranjan Patel has a question, in fact, a couple of questions. I would request you to ask them now. Ramya, if you can unmute. Yeah.
Yes, good afternoon. Brilliant lecture, sir. I'm really delighted to being present in this lecture. I have two questions. I am from Bibigiri National Labour Institute, Ministry of Labour and Employment, Government of India. I have two questions. One, given the present situation of employment and the use of IR4 technology, what would have been the reaction of Gandhi? That I would like to listen from you. This is one. And why despite calling him the father of the nation, why did we exactly did the opposite in terms of Gandhian plan? Why did we completely ignored and accepted something different that Gandhiji proposed? These are the two things that I wanted to listen.
I'll answer the second question first.
Yeah.
Go back to 1937 Karachi Congress. Two young men, Mr. Bose and Mr. Nehru, take control of the economic agenda. They talk about setting up a planning commission. Even then, they talk about a planned economy. They are very much for a centralized Yojana Bhavan in Delhi, which decides what the 400 million Indians will do. And Gandhi, being very politically clever, he says, this is not the right time for me to oppose this Bose and Nehru. He has already had enough problems with Bhagat Singh being hanged and this and that. And there's enough young people and leftists and others who are, doing. So he backs off. He says, you do what you want. But I think the seeds of our entire central planning model and heavy industrialization model goes back to the Karachi Congress. Okay? And it has been built since then. In fact, many of the things at Karachi Congress, let us nationalize coal mines, that happened finally in 1970, 40 years later, but it happened. All of these things, they were thought, there was that intellectual current, and Gandhi was so busy fighting so many different, he was trying to prevent partition, he was trying to prevent this one, he let it go. The question that you are asking now is actually a big, we don't know. I think we don't know. But I come back. You cannot go wrong with basics. If you have an education system and a skill development system which focuses on eye-hand coordination, fine motor skills, right and left brain integration, music, gardening, along with drawing, spinning, along with carpentry. I'm not saying no calculus, I'm not saying no chemistry, of course. Then I have a feeling we will be able to figure out, as technology changes, as the world changes, how to keep ourselves busy and employed. That's all I can say, because frankly, if you ask, hey, what's going to happen tomorrow? It's very difficult. All you can say is keep yourself flexible enough that you can deal with it tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
If we are not able to do that, then it becomes, in fact, this has been the problem in the American Midwest. In the American Midwest, the manufacturing sector workers, their factories were closed and moved to Mexico and China. And then they were not. So what do you do in the new world? Take opioid drugs. I mean, give me a break. I think because they didn't think through that in moments of change, it is flexibility of skills. In Tirukkural, Valluvar says, Katka, Kasadara, Katka pen nerka, Adarkata. Every time you are learning something, Katka, Kasadara, you have to keep unlearning something also.
That is nice.
This is by the way, I cannot answer your question. That's the important thing to understand. Yours is a very tough question. It is not answerable. What we can look for is some thoughts, ideas. 2000 years ago, Tiruvallur is saying, as you learn, please also unlearn. And what you have learned, you apply. He is not interested in theoretical knowledge. You apply what you have learned. You have to. So this is a very, I think Gandhi knew Tirukkural because Rajaji had discussed it with him. I don't know if he had read it because Rajaji's English translation of the Kural was only published in the 1950s after Gandhi had died. Gandhi may have read an earlier Pope's translation or Caldwell's translation, I don't know. But he was acquainted with it. He knew about Tiruvallur, he knew about the Kural, and he and his friend Rajagopalachari used to discuss this quite a bit, this Tamil classic quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 3 more questions. I would like to invite Professor Sonal Yadav, and after that we have 2 more students. So I would request your time. Professor Sonal.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudhir. Very interesting and engaging conversation, Sarthak and Jerry. So my question is in context with what Gandhi wrote in one of the news daily in 1947, and I quote, "In my opinion, it is not a democratic state to find money for founding universities. If the people want them, they will supply the funds. Universities so founded will adorn the country which they represent." Does this mean that education is not a state's affair?
Particularly university education. Gandhi felt that if university education cannot pay for itself, cannot be supported by rich people as part of their philanthropy, plus students as part of fees, then it should not be done. He felt that way. He was not in favor of the government running universities. Again, you must understand the context. The universities in pre-independent India were controlled by the government because they didn't want freedom and sedition. So he preferred Gujarat Vidyapit, Gurukul Kangdi, which were absolutely free and unaided institutions. Gujarat Vidyapit never took any money from the government of Bombay Presidency. Gurukul Kangdi didn't take from United Province government. They were independent, and he encouraged Tagore to raise money directly from philanthropists for Shantiniketan and not take money from the government. So Gandhi felt quite strongly about this.
Okay. And about school education?
Well, school education, he felt it should be community. He was totally against distance, like sending children 5 miles away to school. He would never do. Ashram ke andar itself, he would have a school.
Right.
And he would have children of multiple ages together. You know, the man really tried some very interesting things, and we have neglected them at our cost. Who is to say that we must have children only by class, first standard, second standard, third standard? How do you know that is the best way to teach children? We don't know. But that is a rigid methodology that we have inherited, and we are continuing with. You know,
Right.
so his was a very, he wanted school to be close. He wanted parents to be involved. He wanted music, gardening, spinning, carpentry. He wanted boys and girls to study together. You know, so he was, that way he was ahead of his time in terms of gender stuff. So various things, if you go through the stuff, the way he ran his schools in Sabarmati and in Sevagram, very fascinating. And there was this English woman, Marjorie Sykes, who did a lot of work on Night Alim along with Kumarappa. She says somewhere, the idea of the school as being different from the community doesn't make any sense. Whereas look at what we do. We put our children in a school bus and send them 10 miles away to go to school. School and the community are completely, and look at what universities do. The first thing an Indian university does is gets a campus and builds a big wall, actually separates itself from the rest of the community. Have you noticed that?
Right.
Every IIT, every IIM, big wall. Gandhi would not have approved.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite Vaishnavi to ask a question, and then after that, Shrushti. So Vaishnavi first.
Yes, am I audible clearly?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was a very insightful conversation. I am an undergrad student, so pardon my lack of knowledge. But so the idea of ownership, not just materialistic, but over, generally the idea of ownership has been very significant to civilizations. And over time, it has led to ambitions in civilizations and growth of these civilizations. If you think about it in that sense, trusteeship is a very radical thought. So for someone from my generation, we simply cannot understand the idea of trusteeship. So in that way, do you think trusteeship is still a workable solution which can ensure sustainable progress? Or is there an alternative like philanthropy? If there is, how can that be pushed?
See, I think philanthropy, there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't address the existential moral question, which trusteeship does. Because the trustee, what we are trying to say is that, look, wealth is good. Wealth needs to be created. Wealth needs to be pursued. But wealth is instrumental. Wealth has to be used wisely. Wealth is not an end in itself. In his Muir College speech in Allahabad, he says you cannot serve God and mammon both. If wealth becomes an end in itself, you become a slave to the god of wealth, mammon. You become a slave. So I think that is why it is important. I mean, look, obviously philanthropy is good. Obviously, doing volunteer work is good. Nobody is saying don't do these things. But do they address the underlying philosophical issue? They don't. Trusteeship is an attempt to, again, it does not fully, I'm not saying it's got all the answers, but it is a way of looking. If each of us starts looking that way. By the way, he tells a Maharaja of some state, yeah, you Maharaja, you're just a trustee of your kingdom. You're not the owner of the kingdom. And if you misbehave, your subjects have every right to get rid of you. He actually said that to an Indian Maharaja. So you're a trustee. So this idea that he is trying to say, it's also good. If you act as a trustee, it's unlikely that your subjects will overthrow you. Tumhara bhi insurance you will get. You see, so Gandhi combines practicality and idealism, and I think trusteeship, I am not submitting that it answers everything. I am saying it is a very important thing for us to talk about, to engage with, and maybe we can expand, you and I can expand the idea of trusteeship, take it to different spheres, that is called intellectual development, where you inherit something and you take that idea forward. That's the way I would leave it. I would not, and by the way, Gandhi is not against ownership at all. He is totally against the state taking over private property. He has said that at least 20 times. I don't want the state taking over private property. So he's just telling the owner, you may own the property, but can you understand in your mind that you are better off if you consider yourself a trustee? You're morally better off, you're psychologically better off, because then you're dealing with your wealth as an instrumental item rather than as an end in itself. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Now for the last question, I would like to invite Shruti. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful conversation series. So I have a couple of questions. It's like when you told about that Gandhiji never preferred welfareism. So does it mean he even didn't prefer the equity among the poor people? Because we have seen a lot of change since independence, that we have seen decreasing in the number of poor people in our country. So if there was a reason behind not preferring welfareism, what it could be, and what if we implement Gandhian thoughts and Gandhian ideologies to eradicate poor from our country? So there are three sectors that we focus on, is women sector, female sector, and rural sector and youth sector. So what we can do to improve in these fields by implementing Gandhian thoughts?
Okay, there's a very interesting choice of words you people use. Welfareism, you picked that up. What Gandhi basically was against was giving money or subsidies or goodies to people as a matter of right without their working for it. He is very clear, all able-bodied people give them jobs, do not give them doles, do not give them charity. So when I say he was anti-welfareism, that's what I meant. Whereas Joe Biden, his idea is every month, some money should come into every US citizen's account, irrespective of what they do. Gandhi would have totally opposed it, and he would have said that this will destroy the work ethic, this will destroy the character of the people. He has said so. He has in fact said so. Giving money to able-bodied people destroys their character. And he has said when some Americans came, he said, I don't want your money because if I take money from you, it will destroy my character. The second is you use the word equity. Equity kind of talks about essentially equal outcomes. All of us will be equally rich kind of thing. Gandhi would have opposed it. He was not in favor of it. He was certainly in favor of giving people lots of opportunities to grow, to study, to expand, etc. But he would not have asked for equal results. He was against that. Now, he would have been happy that the number of poor has come down in India in 75 years. He would have been extremely unhappy that it has not been reduced to grinding pauperism has not been reduced to zero. He doesn't think a man, by the way, a man who lives in a hut who is getting 3 meals a day, in Gandhi's view, that person is not poor. Okay. Grinding pauperism is what he's against. So after that, it's up to them. Once they have that, they can work hard, they can improve, they can plant more trees, they can dig more holes, they can do whatever they want. And we can create an environment where they can progress. But I don't think society owes them anything more than that, would have been his position. I don't think he would have looked for formulaic solutions to women, to rural, etc. In general, his view was that, look, stop complaining. Do something about it. Instead of simply saying, oh, British are troubling us, let us start a school ourselves. Instead of simply saying this, you start using a charka and make something. Do something. His whole approach was stop complaining and start acting. On every ground. He said, what is the big deal? Why don't you, in every village, you can have a little thing and you can get oil. Do it. Who's stopping you? That is the same thing with sanitation. Who's stopping you from having a pit and putting your excretion there? His whole approach was try it, do it, don't keep blaming others, having sense of grievance, and looking for an external solution to your problems.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite Sarthak for concluding comments because we have exceeded time and we have taken a lot of your time.
No, I think, we have very, very largely, I think, exceeded time. And I would like to thank Jerry for his, patience also with all these questions. And he very articulately addressed each of these questions. I really thank you, Jerry, and
welcome,
also for organizing this. It was a fascinating conversation and also very good for me to learn and to read this book, on the occasion of...
Do me a favor, do send the YouTube link to Samveg Lalbhai.
Yes, I'll do that. Yeah.
Because the Anandji Kalyanji Trust is theirs. So
we will do that. Yeah. And thank you to all the audience members also for participating and engaging in this conversation. And I hope that, especially in the times that we are living in, we see these unemployment rising and, students out on the roads protesting and everything. And I was just reading this article today, which talks about students no more being students, but they are just people who take exams or take tests or give tests. So pariksharthi, or so your thing about the lack of skills or the entire mechanism of education becoming in that in lack of a purpose-driven education. actually we are seeing the generations turn out like that. So it's a very interesting discussion that we have today, and I hope that we have many takeaways from this, what we learned today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sudhir, for hosting it.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. We have been running after you
Thank you,
since
Sarthak.
November, and we could not hold it
Yeah.
at that time. But we
Thank
are grateful to you, and we are very happy to have you. And we would like to be in touch with you for further discussion or any research or anything. Thank you so much, Jerry. Take care, and thank you, everybody.